talking, a few days ago about this movie Beckett, and you had kind of said, like, I think I'm kind of on the same page with Beckett as I am with Free Guy, maybe more. So I want to follow that thread a little bit. Beckett is it's a Netflix film. And yeah, you got to mention the first thing you mentioned about the movie to me. Besides, we both knew that it was John David Washington, but yeah, go ahead and tell the listeners what was it about Beckett that warmed your soul?
I actually don't remember what you're referring to.
That it was shot on film.
Oh yes, of course, yes. Yeah, I mean, shot in Greece and shot on film, which as we know, I tend to like a lot of Greek films as well, particularly Yorgos Lanthimos. So I don't know if that was something that slightly endeared me to the film, but sure, that's something that I certainly appreciated. It's one thing, yeah, because like when you watch a film and you're like, this looks nicer than your average Netflix production, and you find out it was acquired and they shot on film, it's like, yeah, okay, they actually shot it like a film.
Exactly. I think originally it was being produced by Luca Guadagnino. And it just kind of went on a bit of a journey after that. But yeah, so this movie, like you said, and I will say, by the way, that I agree. I really like that this was shot on film. I think that this speaks to a broader thing about Netflix properties in general, not just Netflix, but mainly Netflix, that it's just the difference between the quality of TV and film is getting way too close, and it's not getting close in a good way. It's getting close in a way that like everything just feels like cheaply digital and like done in a way that just doesn't have as much craft behind it as it could. Now, there are some TV things we've seen that have been tremendously cinematic, but then we've seen so many like TV movies on Netflix, and TV movies can be fantastic, but in the sense where they just feel like they could have just been shows, like they're interchangeable. They lack the sort of heft and the sort of like grainy transportiveness of something that was shot on film. I do think there is a difference. Like there is a difference of me feeling like I'm actually in Greece when the picture itself of John David Washington sleeping on a bus as like the overcast Greece countryside passes him by. That is an affecting moment. And a big part of that is because the visuals of it are so pronounced and they're so crisp and detailed. It lends to the atmosphere of the film. We don't get enough of that. And I want to give Beckett a ton of credit. I think that's one of the better things about this movie.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, like, I mean, obviously not that all films that are shot on film are inherently better looking or whatever. Obviously, a lot of stuff looks great on digital. But totally. I agree with you, like with something like this, even though it's not like a super stylish or flashy movie, that graininess does lend itself to the kind of grounded integrity of the film, where it is like you can see like the dirt and the salt and things, and like you said, the fabric and the texture of things. It gives it a little bit more life. It makes you a little bit closer to the characters. It gives it like some feel or touch that makes it easier to kind of get ingrained into it. Which, I mean, I don't think that necessarily like saves the film, but it does make it, I think, more interesting than if it was just shot on, like a red camera or something. It just would have looked, just a little bit more generic.
I think I would have lost interest in this film very, very quickly otherwise. I think that, so on the one hand, this movie, and we're going to set it up, of course, it follows a very familiar sort of structure. It's kind of, combining a few things. Its main influence is basically The Fugitive. Our main story here is that John David Washington is an American who accidentally stumbles upon some sort of mysterious conspiracy, and he's suddenly being hunted in Greece by the police. He doesn't know why, but they are trying to kill the guy. He's injured. He suffered a horrific car accident. He is just dealing with like the worst of circumstances here. And originally he came to Greece with his girlfriend, played by Alicia Vikander. He now finds himself trying to dodge police. He's not like a special forces guy. He's not like, he's not somebody who like comes out of this movie and is like, well, he has a certain set of skills. No, he's just like a regular dude, at least when we first meet him. And he's just trying to make it. So those are the things I kind of like about the movie, is it has this sort of, like, to what you're saying, lived in sort of groundedness. It's very gritty, and it does have that sort of fugitive feel, but we're, in a different location. It's international. The stakes are kind of heightened because he has to be really careful about who he comes into contact with. We eventually get introduced to a character played by Vicky Krieps, who sort of becomes a part of the film in a big way. Loved seeing her in this. I glad to see her back. We saw her in Fandom Thread. At least for me, it was the first time, and then we recently saw her again. Right in what was that other movie we just saw her in? It was very recent. I'm drawing a blank, but it'll come back to me in a moment. But yeah, that said, it's not the most, like you said, it's not flashy, and I don't think this thing is exceptionally written. Like there are some things about it that I do think are nonsense in terms of like, these people are making the dumbest decisions, and I just do not buy that this would be happening. It really strains belief that something like this would happen. So, and
yeah,
it holds the film back a great deal, and it's hard to sort of buy into it throughout. But I wasn't like, oh, I hate this or anything like that.
it just felt more padded to me. Like it just felt like they kind of had to like stretch it out to kind of justify the film length. And
Old.
in some ways,
That's what we just saw Vicky Krieps in. Old.
oh yes, old, yeah. Well, I still haven't seen old, but I've heard she's in. I heard she's quite good. But yeah, I mean, with Beckett, where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought, unfortunately.
Yeah, just it's not the flashes, like the script of it. You said it was feeling like kind of padded, right? And I agree.
I mean, it just feels like they kind of like. I get like they're kind of going for like the casual European vibe, just because like it is shot in Greece. It has a lot of European producers and filmmakers involved. I believe this is the English language debut of the director. I don't know his name off the top of my head. But that is something that also kind of gives it a little bit of an edge, I guess, that it has kind of more of a casual vibe to it, like especially in the beginning. Like it almost kind of plays out like a character drama. Like it plays out kind of casually as it escalates. And even like when things are starting to get heightened and more extreme, there is sort of a sly kind of ease with which it kind of builds up the tension, and those are the qualities I like a lot about the film. That it kind of it doesn't like rush to the conclusions. It kind of allows things to kind of play out in a more naturalistic sort of way, but that also plays to the film's detriment because it lacks the movie's urgency. It doesn't feel like things are quite as important, even though they say they're very important, and we can kind of feel from John David Washington's performance that it's meant to be important. It does kind of feel like the movie itself is almost weirdly indifferent to the plight of its main title character.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think that when we find out the mystery of like, okay, here's what's going on, I was kind of underwhelmed. I was kind of like, oh, is that it? All right, I guess. I mean, it just was very like not expected necessarily. I think people will be at least, I don't know, maybe they'll be lightly surprised by some stuff that happens toward the end of the movie here. But I don't know. There was nothing about it that was subversive, I guess. There was nothing about it where I was just like, man, that is like really hitting me on another level. It's just sort of like a very flat movie in terms of excitement. It's the kind of movie where like the rising action never quite tops itself. It's just a lot of scenes put together, it feels like. The director here is Ferdinando Cito Filomarino. Never seen any of his films before. I know that his first film is like not, especially liked, but his follow-up, Antonia, did get good reviews. I know some people who do like that movie quite a bit. And I think this is like, definitely a film I think that I don't know if Antonia was English language. I don't think it was, but I think this movie is a little bit more of like, okay, shooting for a wider audience and everything, especially with John David Washington here in the mix. That said, I don't have a hard time thinking about the person who would like this. Like it's weird because like it's not a dad movie necessarily, but it is the kind of movie that like I could see some dads liking this and finding it kind of interesting, but not loving it, not being like, like they would with like Greyhound or Lone Survivor, or like those kinds of films, mainly because I don't think that like what they like about those films, like dads, is like, okay, this character's hyper competent, is going to come in and like do all kinds of awesome things. That's not really this movie. He's just kind of a normal dude.
Yeah, I mean, there is something like that's another kind of thing where it's like it's both what I like and what I find to be a detriment of the film is that like Beckett, like you said, he's not very smart. He's not like particularly savvy in terms of like figuring things out. He's a tourist who just happened to get into this turn of events that are way in over his head, and like he's just kind of trying to to get out there with his life. And I'm not quite sure. I'm curious, where do you really stand at this point on John David Washington as a movie star, I guess?
Well, let's see. I have been thinking about this because I was really, really unimpressed with, how Malcolm and Marie turned out. But I wasn't sure, it wasn't the kind of thing, that was his last movie, right? Malcolm and Marie, it's not a bad performance.
I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth a little bit. I never thought to myself during Malcolm and Marie, like, what is John David Washington doing? But I don't know. There was also no point in the movie where I was like, man, how does somebody act like that? I don't know. Tenet, yikes. I don't think he's bad in the movie, but I do think that he just is very dry, I think, in that movie, in my opinion. Okay. I think the movie that I've seen him just really stand out is BlacKkKlansman, and that's about it. I think Monster, he kind of has just sort of a bit role in that movie. It came out way later than it was supposed to. And I never did watch Monsters and Men, right? That was one of the other ones he was a lead in.
I haven't seen it either.
I know I've heard good things, but I can't speak more clearly on that.
Yeah, and of course he was in Ballers on HBO,
which I haven't seen. Yeah, he was one of the main
episodes.
Characters in that, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I find John David Washington sort of fascinating because, I mean, it's unavoidable. Like, he is the son of Denzel Washington, arguably, if not the best, one of the best actors working today, and one of our rare bankable actors in a streaming era. And it's a given that if his son has the charisma, which I think generally he does. I've heard some people argue that he doesn't have charisma. I don't think it's necessarily true. I think he's trying to work off of his charisma, and that, like, when I see him in Tenet in this, it seems like he's trying to downplay his charisma and kind of play it more like the anti-Denzel type characters, like the type of characters where
he's more subdued.
Right, yeah, more subdued, kind of more
he's
innocent,
cool, calm, cool, collected. Innocent is an interesting word, like in something like Tenet. And so you never get the sense that he's just like a son of a, you know what I mean? Like, he's not an anti-hero in a lot of things. But then in Malcolm and Marie, he does kind of do that. And I think maybe coincidentally, that might be why it's, for me, my least favorite performance from him, technically.
Well, that's the thing, right?
Actually, no, Tenet would be my least favorite.
Okay, we just disagree on 10, I guess.
I just keep going back and forth. You can't trust what I say.
Sure.
My opinion keeps changing.
But yeah, I guess like Malcolm and Marie by default is like his most Denzel-esque performance. Like, that's him like monologuing, that's him getting riled up, like what we kind of expect from like certain Denzel Washington performances. And I don't think he's bad at that, but it just seems like that's not the type of performances he's interested in. Going off of Tenet and Beckett, and even to some extent BlacKkKlansman, it just seems like he's trying to like kind of foster his own image. But I'm wondering if that's playing to his detriment, because like a movie like this, like, I don't think he's given a bad performance, but I just keep constantly thinking, like, if Denzel Washington was in this movie, it would just instantly be 40 times more interesting.
I think if this movie had just been a romantic comedy with him, Alicia Vikander, just sort of like a romantic dramedy or something, that was my favorite thing about him in this movie, was when he was just there was something about him where he was kind of holding himself back a little bit with her, but he was also fun and light and engaging. And I was really invested in the dynamic they had as a couple. And I think that is where he shines for me. I got that same thing from bits of Malcolm and Marie, when it's him and Zendaya just kind of goofing off and not really taking the movie so seriously. And then BlacKkKlansman, I think that is a serious movie, like serious stuff happens, but the best stuff about that movie is when he's just like, interacting and kind of like being a little funny, and like, him and Adam Driver kind of bouncing off each other. Like, I think to what you're saying, the guy has a style, and he's smart not to try to just totally riff off of Denzel. Denzel, I'll go further. I think he's one of the all-time great American actors, period.
Sure.
So,
yeah, that's what I was getting at, basically.
Yeah, he has to avoid being in that shadow and being compared lightly. And I think he's making smart career choices, at least in theory. But I think we've yet to see that role where, man, it is really just him firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I mean, I guess BlacKkKlansman's the closest we've gotten at this point. I think he was nominated for an Oscar for that one, right? Am I remembering?
I believe so. Yeah. I think, well, if not nominated, that might have been a case where Adam Driver was nominated. I will fact check that. And
okay,
then I
can't remember
that he got shafted. Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think you might be on the ball there because like when I think back to his better performances, he is usually working with a co-star or a counterpoint, like you said, Adam Driver in BlacKkKlansman, Zendaya, Malcolm and Marie, even Ballers with The Rock, and with Tenet, he's even for at least part of the movie he's working off of Robert Pattinson, and that's I guess like Tenet's kind of the weird one because it's like both, it's like he's playing off himself and he's it's another buddy kind of thing. And I think he feels more comfortable when he has a screen partner that he can kind of like bounce off of. In a movie like this, he seems just sort of uncomfortable. Like he's kind of playing up like what he's expected to do, but like it's just a lot of like crying and looking distressed and like, being kind of frantic and stuff like that. And just the performance ultimately just becomes a bit repetitive. I don't think it's bad. It just doesn't seem like he's totally at ease with what he wants Beckett to be, both the character and the movie.
I think we're pretty aligned on this one. So I fact checked it, and that it is the case. He was not nominated, but Adam Driver was. Because I remember there was like a lot of like, seriously, like John David Washington like makes the movie. Like Adam Driver's really good.
It's his movie, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It was very strange. Yeah, he didn't get nominated for Best Actor, and that is a bit of a travesty there. But I think he has a fantastic performance, Common. I think the guy has a lot of sway. People are digging him. I think it is an actor. I hope that Beckett and Malcolm and Marie don't soil that too badly. Maybe Tenet to an extent too. I don't know really what producers are kind of looking at right now with those movies. He does have another movie though coming up, the new David O. Russell flick, which
yeah.
Let's run down that cast. Christian Bale,
Mike Myers,
Margot Robbie, Robert De Niro, Rami Malek.
Yes.
I know you probably not. Zoe Saldana, we mentioned her earlier. Timothy Olyphant, Michael Shannon, Chris Rock, Anya Taylor-Joy.
Yeah, I was about to
Taylor Swift, Matthias Schoenaerts,
sure,
Indy Darling, and Andrea Riseborough, Indy Queen. So we're kind of looking at one of the most stacked casts of the last few years.
Yeah.
And I think it's already been filmed. I think they filmed it earlier this year, so we should be getting that pretty soon.
Yeah, I mean, as we're kind of mentioning before, it seems like I think John David Washington has some sense of what he wants as a performer, and I think Hollywood's like still kind of lost. Like they're trying, like clearly, like I mean, as the son of Denzel Washington, like we said, like the man, at the very least, they're going to try to give John David Washington the star treatment. And I don't think he's squandering it at this point. I think most of his movies or at least most of his performances are pretty good. I just feel like he's just not quite figuring out, like you say, he hasn't quite gotten that performance yet where it's just like, okay, like he's a powerhouse. I don't think he's ever going to be Denzel, but like he can, justify his star status and won't be like a nepotism sort of thing.
Yeah.
But like I think I can understand if people watch Beckett and they're just kind of like, so what's the deal with this guy? Like why should we care? Like from this performance, if you only watch this performance, I guess I can sort of understand it. But I don't think it's a bad performance at the same time.
Yeah. I like that he's sort of trying to carve out his own sort of career and it's coming across like he could easily do that, where, it's not the, statuesque performance of his dad. Maybe one day it could be, but it would be its own thing. And I think that's highly respectable. And I think that's this movie. It's respectable. There's nothing about it that I think offends to any great degree the cinematic senses. There's just a few screenplay oddities here, some things that left some bad taste in my mouth, but not aggressively so. It's just such a run-of-the-mill sort of political conspiracy thriller with just not a lot of flavor to it aside from some of the filmmaking, like the camera work, as we mentioned. And that said, I think that for me with this movie, this is such a good case of like good idea, bad execution, right? I think that it reminds me a lot of those movies that we got sort of in like the late 2000s, the 20 knots, where they were just like these sort of bland, political thrillers, just sort of trying to like make movies really quickly off of these like political conspiracy things happening in like the Middle East because we were in such a post 9/11 realm. First movie I think of something like that is like Body of Lies. It's just like these sort of like, okay, they just don't really have much going on there, but they have amazing talent attached. So like, people are interested to a degree. So for me, that's Beckett.
Yeah, I mean, what's frustrating about it is that like you can kind of see the better film eking out throughout it. Like you said, it does kind of echo not only 90s and 2000 conspiracy theories, but sort of like the paranoia thrillers of the 70s, especially when like we see John David Washington from these like kind of empty vistas, but like there's always like the sense of like someone's tracking him or watching him, and he can't be two steps ahead of himself because there's always someone trying to take him down for reasons unknown. And I think that stuff is interesting. And I also feel like the movie, like it has some political themes that it's trying to explore. It also kind of like sometimes taps into commentary on race, but it seems like it's too skittish to do either. Like it anytime it sort of like broaches either topic, it just avoids it. And like I said, it feels like there's a void here where it wants to be a little bit deeper, wants to be maybe even like a meaner film, but it just kind of settles for being something a little bit more generic and listless by accident or maybe even by design. And that might make it more broadly accessible, but at the same time makes it more forgettable and generic. So yeah, it's there's something here. Like I don't think it's bad enough for me to be like that was a missed opportunity, but I just kept thinking like I just wish it was a little bit better just to justify me being like, yeah, it was pretty good. It seems like it's on the cusp, but never quite earning that status.
All right. That is Beckett. I'm glad you mentioned the 70s vibe because like he even dresses like the clothes that he like has are very, very 70s. And I think that's very much on purpose.
Yeah. And also like, just like Grease itself, like kind of has like a non-Western vibe. Like it feels like it's like kind of like, trapped in time almost, and I do really like how the movie uses Grease in that respect. I think it's very interesting, but agreed. I don't know if it's enough to carry a film.
The timing of this movie too, like the civil unrest and the sort of like being in an international place under such turmoil, kind of easy to draw upon that considering current events happening right now, but we'll leave it at that. So, and I guess that's an evergreen statement, you know. But yeah, that is Beckett. It's available to watch now on Netflix. So low risk to check this one out. If you are a fan of John David Washington, you want to give this guy, see what this guy can do. If you kind of like this kind of setup for a film, it might be worth your time. I'd say check it out. It might just be a fun Sunday afternoon watch on the old Netflix machine. Thank you so much for listening to our show. Be sure to subscribe to Cinemaholics on your favorite podcast app of choice or find us on YouTube. See you all next time.